Hello, let's talk about some cozy books for chilly nights. Hi, I'm Colleen Delaney. Welcome back to my channel. Here I talk about books and writing, and today we are going to talk about a plethora of books that you can just dive into when you want to feel cozy on a chilly night. These are not all cozy books, so some of these books are a little scary. Some of them do give you cozy feels, but they're more like the perfect book, I think, to create a cozy atmosphere while reading under a blanket with a cup of your beverage of choice that's warm. We'll start with a moment of housekeeping. I did run a poll over whether I should do this video or another video or a third video. And the video that came in second place was my favorite historical reads of all time. I wanted to let you know I'm going to make that video at some point. I've had like an outline done about it for months, and you'll get it in like January maybe or February, just not right now. So if you really wanted to get some great historical fiction recommendations, there are a couple on this list, but you'll also get a full video about that sometime in the next couple months. I divided all these up by genre, and I'll put chapters at the bottom, so if you want to skip ahead, because we are going to start with children's, which I don't usually do, but I felt like I couldn't make this video without my favorite cozy children reads as a children's librarian. The first book is Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulson. And you may notice that doesn't look like a book. And that's because it's just the dust jacket. I went to go get it off my son's bedside table and it's gone. Just the dust jacket's here. So I don't know if he brought it to school today. He might have. But this is a very cute middle grade graphic novel about Garlic, who lives with a witch and a bunch of other animated vegetables. And Garlic has to confront the vampire that's just moved in to make sure the vampire is not there to wreak havoc, because she's Garlic and she can withstand vampires. It's a super cozy, really cute, perfect read for like 8 and up for kids, but also like I loved it. I've read it twice. I read it to my 9-year-old, and then I also read it out loud to my 6-year-old, and she really enjoyed it as well. A very cute read. Next, I have a series, and it is The Lighthouse Family by Cynthia Rylant. And let's see if I've got book 1 in here. Nope. What was book 1? So I'm missing one right now, and book 1 is the one I'm missing. But this is the story of a found family living on an island that has a lighthouse on it. But the found family is a cat, a dog, and 3 mice children. And the books are just really cozy stories about what they get up to on this island, the different characters they meet, and how their new family works. It's very sweet. I read this first to my oldest when I think he was 7, and I'm going to start reading it to my 6-year-old very soon. But also, if you are an adult just looking for a cozy children's series to get into, this one is a very sweet, lovely book series to get into. Next, this series has been getting kind of a lot of like resurgence on BookTube lately, and it's Brambley Hedge. So I have the complete Brambley Hedge, and by me I mean my 5-year-old who is obsessed with these. But this is the story of a bunch of mice who live in a hedge, and they live like the most cottagecore existence you could ever imagine. And there's a story for each season, and then I think there's 8 stories total. So there's a story for each season, and then there are a couple other stories, like one in which they climb a mountain, one in which they go on a sea adventure. They're really sweet, very like English countryside. They kind of remind me of Beatrix Potter. The pictures are absolutely gorgeous though, so I'd really recommend just like taking time to leaf through this if you ever see it. There's a really sweet one from the summer story, but it's beautifully illustrated, will give you all the cottagecore feels, and will probably make you want to make your own jam. This next series is something that like I'm obsessed with, but I know not a lot of people know about, and it is The Year at Maple Hill Farm, and then the companion, which is Our Animal Friends, about all the animals that live at the farm. This is the story of a farm told in 1 year by month, and what happens on a farm in each month. My children are obsessed with this book. I also love it. If you're a type of person who loves like Wheel of the Year type things, like you like the rhythm of the seasons, this is the book for you. It's not super easy to find. I did find it used on Amazon. I first found it at the library and was like, I need that book. So then I did find a used copy on Amazon and got it that way. But I mean, this is perfect for any animal lover. My kids are all really into animals. Like they go to wildlife camp in the summer and get to spend time with animals there. And so these are some of their favorite books to read. All the different kinds of chickens. That's my daughter's favorite page. Very fun. If you have an animal lover in your life, it's also a really good holiday present as we're coming up on that. And then lastly, I grabbed these two, which are mostly for kids. I wouldn't really say these are for adults who want to read kids' books. But it's this series in which you have classical music with the story. So this is the story of Sleeping Beauty. And then as you open it up, there's buttons to press and the music from the ballet comes up. The pictures are very fun also. One of my 5-year-olds loves this series. She has multiple. We also have the Nutcracker, but the Nutcracker I didn't bring down because it is falling apart. So this one is The Four Seasons by Vivaldi. This one is Sleeping Beauty. I can't remember. Oh, Tchaikovsky wrote Sleeping Beauty, and then Tchaikovsky also wrote the Nutcracker. There's a few more. She'll get another one for Christmas because she loves them so much. So that's it for kids. Now let's swing to romance. Kind of the opposite of kids because I don't have any horror on here. So the first romance I recommend is The Duke Buys a Bride by Sophie Jordan. I have a copy, but I lent it to my sister. So here is the cover. And in this one, it is the third book in a series, but you can totally read it as a standalone. We have the Duke, Marcus, who is really pissed. He's hungover and he's woken up covered in horse shit in a barn. Stumbles out of the barn and finds that there is a good old-fashioned wife auction going on, and he cannot believe that they're auctioning a human being to be a wife. So he buys her so that he can make her his housekeeper and give her employment. But do you think that's what's going to happen? Probably not. So the woman who is being auctioned has made a deal with her friend that he's supposed to come buy her and they will be married, and her friend doesn't show up. So she's very grateful when the Duke buys her, but she's not so sure about how this arrangement's going to work out. It's Sophie Jordan. It's a ton of fun. I love it. Next, I've got Hearts on Hold by Cherish Reed. I got this on my Kindle, so I don't have the hard copy. And this story is type A, tightly wound professor meets loosey-goosey children's librarian to sort of like collaborate for something the college is doing. And once the children's librarian finds out that she likes romance novels, all bets are off. It's a very cozy, fun romance read that you can definitely read in one sitting, and should. Next, I have the Castles Ever After series by Tessa Dare. I have the first two with me. The third is with my sister, and they are fun Regency romance novels. In the first one, Romancing the Duke, we have our heroine, Izzy, who is the daughter of like a famous children's author who has died. And she is bequeathed a castle. She still shows up at the castle, but the castle is inhabited by a very grumpy, scarred duke. And that's their love story. The second one, Say Yes to the Marquess, is about Cleo, and she's been engaged for 8 years, and she decides she's no longer going to wait around for her fiance anymore to come marry her. So she wants to call off the wedding. His brother, Reese, shows up and tries to talk her out of calling out of the wedding. But while he's trying to talk her out of it, he starts to think that maybe she should call off the wedding and marry him instead. And the third one is When a Scot Ties in the Knot, and that is about Madeline, who is a very shy, like teenager and doesn't want to go to balls or court anyone. So she kind of creates this fiance and writes letters to him for something like 10 years. And he's in the army, and then she kills him off. But it turns out that her letters were actually going to someone because the name she made up was a real person in the army. And then he shows up to marry her, and it's wonderful. Very great series. You can literally burn through that in 1 week because they're very hard to put down. Okay, next up I have the Stay a Spell series by Juliet Cross. I'm trying to pick them up right now. There they are. So we've got Wolf Gone Wild, Don't Hex and Drive, Witches Get Stitches. What is that one? Always Practice Safe Hex, Rusting Witch Face, and Walking in a Witchy Wonderland. These are the stories of witches, werewolves, vampires, Grimms, and New Orleans. And they are very hot, very steamy love stories between these supernatural creatures. I'm currently reading Rusting Witch Face. I'm about a third of the way done. It's very good. I'll probably finish it tonight or tomorrow morning because I love it. Each book follows a different sister, and they're wonderful. Next, I have Called to the Deep by Desiree Nicolay. This is like hot fishing captain. Saves woman from shipwreck. But then woman turns out to be a mermaid. And mermaids eat people in this world. It's wonderful. The vibes are so cool because it's coastal Maine in the fall, so it definitely has that cozy feel. There's a sequel coming out called The Song of Lorelei. It's coming out in January. I cannot wait to read it. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about this book. It's definitely gonna be one of my best romances of the year. If you like mermaids, if you wanna feel like you're on the coast of Maine, grab it and cozy up and read. Next, I picked kind of like an oldie but a goodie, and that is the Lisa Kleypas Hathaway series. So I only own book 2, which is Seduce Me at Sunrise, because I read these books when I was in grad school and I had no money, so I got them all from the library. But this is the story, or the whole series is the story of the Hathaway siblings who've suddenly come into an inheritance and are now part of like the upper crust society in London, and they don't know what to do. So the second one is my favorite, and this is about the sister Wynne. And this one is kind of like Wuthering Heights if it had a happy ending, because her hero is very much a Heathcliff character who's like pined after her forever, but doesn't necessarily think he's good enough for her. It's wonderful. Lisa Kleypas is a goddess writer, so you really can't go wrong with any of her novels. And then my last romance series is the Lore Olympus books. So, Volume 1, Volume 2, and my newly purchased, not yet read, Volume 3, which I'm allowed to read after I finish my NaNoWriMo, which I'm going to finish probably tomorrow or the next day. So I'll finish Resting Witch Face and then I'll read this. These are the most beautiful graphic novels I think I've ever seen. So basically, when I describe it, it's got like the characters from Greek mythology, but it's not really Greek mythology. It's kind of like more of an urban fantasy feel with an age gap romance about Persephone and Hades. And the blues and the pinks are so gorgeous. They just sweep you away. I love the artwork in here. My children love the artwork. My daughter just saw that I bought the next one and was so excited to flip through it. Wonderful story. So pretty. I love it. Also, because they are graphic novels, I mean, you can read one very easily in a day. So if you've got like a quiet evening, grab one of these. You'll read the whole thing. And then you'll read it again because it's so good. Now let's move on to mystery. The first book I don't have because I gave it to my mom is The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray. And that's a book that's like, what if all of Jane Austen's heroines and heroes were friends or connected in some way? And they all went to a house party at the Knightleys, one of those old school Regency parties in which you stay for like a month. But then Mr. Wickham showed up, and then someone murdered him. And now you have to figure out who did it. The two main characters are the daughter of Catherine Tilney and the son of the Darcys, and it's very fun, especially if you love Jane Austen and you like kind of like cozy historical mysteries. This is a great one. Next, I have The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentile. I think is how you say her last name. I got an ARC for this, so here is the cover. And this book, first of all, is fascinating. Second of all, it's about a group of people who are at the Boston Public Library and they hear a scream, and then they find out later that someone was murdered, and they kind of try to figure out who it was and what happened. But at the same time, you get chapters in between of the author of this story sending chapters to one of her like critique partners, and their relationship becomes fascinating. So that's definitely a mystery if you want to read something that's like unlike any other mystery I've ever read before. It was really cool and good and cozy. Next up, not a cozy mystery, but perfect for a cozy night in, is The Sea of Lost Girls by Carol Goodman. This tells the story of Tess, and basically the tagline I would say for this is that Tess is hiding secrets from her past, or at least trying to. But then one night, her son's girlfriend gets murdered at a time when she's not sure of her son's whereabouts. And now she begins to question the person her son is, if her past is going to come back, stop haunting her and actually be in the present. It's a great story. It's dark academia because it takes place at a boarding school. It's really creepy winter vibes. It's like February, I think. Everything's very icy. And there's great local folklore about women that have disappeared. Not women, girls that have disappeared in this town. I love Carol Goodman. This is my favorite one she's ever written. You should try it. Definitely try it. The Anatomist's Wife by Annalee Huber. This is another historical mystery. This one is about Lady Darby, who is at a house party, and a really, really brutal murder takes place. Like, it's very gory and grotesque. Before she was widowed, she drew illustrations of cadavers, which really wasn't allowed at the time period. And she uses her knowledge to try to solve the crime. It was a very good historical mystery. Next, I've got The Family Game by Catherine Steadman, which I read very recently. This is the story of Harry, who is a recent best-selling novelist, and her getting to know her new fiance's family. And they are very, very wealthy, and they are very, very eccentric, and they are very, very dangerous. It's got great Thanksgiving to Christmas vibes, so perfect to read this time of year. And my last mystery I have is The Broken Girls by Simone St. James. I loved this mystery. It takes place in November, so it's great for this time of year to read. It is about Fiona, who is a journalist, and 20 years earlier, her older sister had been murdered in this like field next to this old kind of like condemned school. The murders never sat well with her. She always feels like she was missing something. So while she's kind of investigating the reopening of the school, she finds a body that's really old. It's from like 70-ish years ago. And now we get the dual timeline. We get both Fiona trying to figure out the mystery and the story of some students who went there around the time of this person's murder. It was fantastic. It definitely made me a huge Simone St. James fan. I really liked this. It made me read another one of her books, which I also really liked. It's got some supernatural elements, but in a way that's like just enough that they're not overpowering. Now I have a couple historicals for you. The first is The Family by Naomi Kropotkin. This tells the story of two girls as they grow from young children through their kind of like young motherhood, adulthood, while they are living in the kind of like earliest rendition of the mafia in New York City. It is a lot about how being a part of the mafia affects their family, their relationships, and their lives overall. It was a very cozy, kind of quiet historical read. I read it last year in the winter, and I really liked it as kind of like a medium-paced historical fiction. Then we've got The Lost Apothecary, which is also kind of like historical magical realism. So I know it's classified as fantasy some places, but I don't really feel like this is a fantasy novel, which is why I put it in historical fiction. We have two timelines. One is the present, and this woman is in London, and she just found out that her husband's having an affair, and she doesn't know what to do. The other timeline is in the late 1700s, and there's another woman who is an apothecary, and she deals out poisons, but only if you're going to use the poison to kill a man. So it was a very fun juxtaposition of the two kind of like roles of women in society during two wildly different time periods, and you got to kind of like view the history through the present day eye. I'm trying to remember what her name was, Caroline. Through Caroline's eyes. I really enjoyed it. I know there were some mixed reviews, but I think it was a very good historical fiction piece. Lastly, I have The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis. This is another dual timeline, but our timelines are 1920 or 1921 maybe. It's after the outbreak of this influenza pandemic, so I think it's like 1920. And then our other timeline is the late 60s, early 70s. In our first timeline, we are following Lillian, who is an artist's model, and then ends up sort of like scamming her way into this wealthy household to be kind of like a ladies' man, like maid, like companion type character. In the later time period, we're following Veronica, who's like an actual model, and she's doing a photo shoot because the house that Lillian worked in is now a museum. There's a fun mystery that weaves throughout. I really like this one because there are two time periods that I feel like we don't see a ton in historical fiction, and they were very fun to learn more about. The Magnolia Palace is a real place in New York City, which I had no idea about, so it was also fun to learn about. I had one more historical fiction that I don't own, and it's Outstealing Horses by Per Pettersson. And I read this a very long time ago, and I read it in January during a crazy blizzard on my day off from work when I worked in a bookstore. I don't remember the details of the book too much, other than it's about a man who's like in his late 60s, and he's reflecting about like his childhood, like teenage years, living in Norway during World War II when the Nazis, I believe, occupied Sweden, and he lives very close to the border. It's a very quick read, and I remember it being like a perfect read for a winter's day. It is a little sad, so go in knowing that. Like, not like sad, but like depressing. It's one of those books. But I still really enjoyed it, and I think if you like that sort of feel, pick it up, because it's an older book, so not a lot of people talk about it anymore. Now, moving on to contemporary fiction. I only have two. The first one is A Week in Winter by Maeve Binchy. This is about a woman, Chickie, who has lived in the United States after kind of like lying to her family about why she moved there, and then moves back to Ireland and opens a like hotel, bed and breakfast type thing. And it's about all the people that come and stay there. And it's a really lovely, quiet, cozy read. And it's all about a time in winter. So it's like the off season when people are coming to visit. I really enjoyed it. I felt like you could read the stories almost as like little vignettes. And it was a very fun book. I'm pretty positive this is the last book Maeve Binchy wrote before she died. If that's not true, I'll write down here that it's not true. And then I've got The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry by Gabrielle Zevin. This is the story of like an island, a bookshop, and the people that occupy both. I saw that it got a movie adaptation, which surprised me because the trailer made it look kind of like a romantic comedy, and it's not a romantic comedy. It's got a great romance in it, but I'm going to give you a warning that I did cry really hard at the end of this book. And it's really just like a snapshot of a bunch of people's lives and like how life can kind of go right and how life can kind of go wrong. Let's move on to fantasy, which I do have quite a few for, but some of them are in series. The first series I'm recommending is the Light Isle series, which book 1 is Wolfskin and book 2 is Fox Mask, and they are by Juliette Marillier. In the first book, we follow 2 young men from childhood, Evand and Summerland, and they are very good friends and kind of like blood brothers, but they have wildly different morals. And they are part of an expedition going from Norway to the Orkney Islands to create a settlement. Once there, they meet Nessa, who is the niece of the king, and she's also kind of like a priestess of their ancient religion, and Evand has an immediate connection with her. At the same time, there's this bad tragedy that happens at the settlement, and Evand is starting to wonder if Summerland was involved and what his blood brother is actually like. It's a really good romance, but also like mostly fantasy, I would say, and great setting in like those northern islands that make me feel very cozy. The sequel, Fox Mask, I'm not going to tell you a lot about, so I don't give anything away from the first one, but it's basically the next generation of people living in this settlement. So the mix of the Viking and, they weren't called Scottish then, but like the Orkney residents and how they're living together. This one is definitely has more of like a high fantasy feel, whereas this one has more of a historical fantasy feel. They're both absolutely fantastic. Next, I've got Blackbird House by Alice Hoffman, which is more of a magical realism type book, but it tells the story of a piece of land for 200 years. You follow this house and who lives in it and what happens, and it's gorgeous. It's very short. I read this in one day in the spring, and it definitely has more of like a cozy late autumn winter feel than spring, even a little bit of summer, because you do go throughout the year, but it's a really, really wonderful story. I was actually really surprised when I found it at Half Price Books because I'd never heard of it before, and I can't believe it's more popular. So if you liked Practical Magic or any of Alice Hoffman's books, like I really like The Dove Keepers, you should pick it up because it's very well written and it will really stick with you. Next, I have Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. I just read this in October, I think, and this is the story of a man named August who has to come home to his magical island called Sersha because his mother has died and she wants her ashes there. He left 13 or 14 years earlier after this horrible tragedy happened on the island, and he left kind of without saying goodbye. And when he gets back, he needs to face not only an entire population of people who hate him and think that he's responsible for the tragedy, but also Emery, who's the woman he left behind, who he was supposed to ring with. It was really good. It's got like those good like island cozy vibes and magical realism sort of fantasy vibes too. Next, I don't have a copy of this, but it's The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. This takes place in the 1920s in Alaska, and it is about a homesteading couple who have no children unhappily. They really want some. And one night they make a wish and like build a snow child. And then the next morning they find a girl outside, and it's kind of about them coming to grips with whether or not this child is magical or this child was abandoned in the woods. And I really liked it, and it's got great winter vibes if you want like a really good wintry vibe book. Also, it's a cool time period, 1920s in Alaska, because I feel like historical stuff that gets written in an off time periods is very fun to read about. So that's The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. And then the last cozy fantasy series I'm recommending, which is kind of weird because I feel like if you want to read this, you've read it, but it's The Lord of the Rings. I find these books very cozy and perfect for chilly nights, probably because the first time I read them all was in the fall, and then the second time I read them all, I read them from like January to April. So I definitely like kind of associate cold weather with reading these books, but they're those stories that also you just feel like you can go back to because they just make you feel like nostalgic. I feel like not mostly, but a lot of people who are my age or older definitely have like this sort of nostalgia connection to Lord of the Rings from either reading them as children / young adults or because of when the movies came out when when my generation was young adults. You might be around my age or you might be way younger and be like, oh, that came out when I was 2. Either way, it's a great cozy read. So the next genre, whatever I have in here, is Christmassy books. And I don't read a ton of Christmassy books, but here are my 2 suggestions. The first one is My True Love Gave to Me by Stephanie Perkins. This is my destroyed copy that my children drew all over. But this is a collection of 12 short stories that are young adults, romances / romantic comedies. Not all of them are romantic comedies. And they're lovely. I'll give you a 1-sentence description for each story. The first one, Midnights by Rainbow Roll, is a story about coming home after you've gone to college and how your relationships change with your friends from home. Second one is The Lady and the Fox by Kelly Link, which is sort of like a fantasy magical realism about a girl who is adopted into a very theatrical family and the ghost that hangs out in their house. The third one, Angels in the Snow by Matt De La Pena, is about a boy named Shy who is away from his family at Christmas for the first time since his mother died and since moving away to college. And he is dealing with pretty abject poverty and to the point where he's going hungry when he meets a wealthy girl and starts a relationship with her. Fourth is Polaris is Where You'll Find Me by Jenny Han, and that is the story of Santa's adopted daughter and how she fits in and doesn't fit in with the elves. Fifth is It's a Yuletide Miracle, Charlie Brown by Stephanie Perkins, and that is the story of Marigold picking out a Christmas tree to try to jam in her apartment that is overflowing with boxes since she and her mother left her father, and about her striking up a relationship with North, the boy that works at the Christmas tree lot. Next is Your Temporary Santa by David Leviathan, which is about a young Jewish boy whose first boyfriend wants him to dress up as Santa and trick his little sister. Next is Krampuslof by Holly Black, and that is about a group of girls who sort of accidentally raise Krampus and then have a party and he's there. Next is What the Hell Have You Done, Sophie Roth by Gail Foreman, and it is about a young girl who is Jewish moving to the middle of nowhere in the United States and realizing how out of place she feels after growing up in New York City. Next is Beer Buckets and Baby Jesus by Myra McIntyre, and that is about a bad boy and the pastor's daughter putting on a Christmas pageant to save the day. Next is Welcome to Christmas, California by Kirsten White, and that is the story of a diner in the middle of the desert and how certain people can make food heal a lot of wounds. Next is The Star of Bethlehem by Allie Carter, which is kind of like a Hannah Montana story with a little bit of a sad twist. And lastly is The Girl Who Woke the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, which is maybe the most beautiful Christmas-themed short story I've ever read about a very dark Dickensian island in which a young woman might be forced to marry a terrible priest, but then she awakens an ancient god. So that's My True Love Gave to Me. I usually read it every year. I think this year I'm only going to read a couple of the stories because last year I felt like I'd read it too much, but they're beautiful. And then my next Christmas suggestion is, of course, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I haven't read it since 1996-ish, but we watch the movie every year, and I feel like if you want to feel super cozy, light a candle, put a fire in your fireplace, grab a cup of tea, and read A Christmas Carol. Lastly, I have 2 books that seem to fit the bill for this that are on my TBR, and they are The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. This is a dark academia dealing with tarot. It has the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It is like a Gothic museum. I can't wait to read it. I've been kind of busy. I made the mistake of telling my children that they could pick out what book I was going to read next, and they didn't bring me this, and I kind of wanted to read it next, but I'll get to it. And then lastly is Winter Solstice by Ellen Hildebrand, which is a contemporary fiction about a family who have all been going through things coming back together for Christmas. I hope you found something on this very extensive list of cozy books to read on chilly nights and that you are currently feeling very cozy. It feels weird for me to be filming right now because it's super sunny out right now, which it hasn't been. It's been really cold and snowing almost every day. But we finally had a little bit of a warm up. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to get cozy tonight and read, as always. I will be reading Rusting Witch Face tonight. as I'm cozied up before getting ready for the Thanksgiving holiday. And I hope you are reading something really cozy too. If you are, please drop in the comments the title of the cozy book you are reading. And yeah, thanks for sticking around this long. As always, I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. See you soon.